Hi, this is the AI Storyteller. I'm Mark. The book we are interpreting for you in this issue is the classic collection of short stories by the renowned Japanese author Ryunosuke Akutagawa, titled Rashomon. This anthology includes both the titular work Rashomon and Akutagawa's masterpiece In a Grove. These two stories share a special and inseparable relationship. Let's first take a look at the author. When it comes to Japanese literature, Ryunosuke Akutagawa is an unavoidable name. Despite having a creative career of less than 20 years and primarily producing medium and short-length stories, this doesn't hinder him from being counted among Japan's top writers. The most prestigious literary award in contemporary Japan, the Akutagawa Prize, is named after him. Ryunosuke Akutagawa's birth name was Ryunosuke Tsushima. He was born on March 1, 1892, in Tokyo, to a family engaged in the dairy business. 7 months later, his mother suffered a mental illness, and his father couldn't care for him, so he was sent to his maternal grandmother's house. When he was 11 years old, his mother's condition worsened, and she passed away. The following year, he was adopted by his uncle and became his foster child, changing his surname to his mother's maiden name, Akutagawa. The Akutagawa family had a fondness for theater and literature. They had even run a tea ceremony establishment for members of the Tokugawa clan during the Edo period, making them a family steeped in Edo culture. Akutagawa was influenced by this atmosphere, fostering a deep literary foundation. At the age of 19, he entered the English Literature Department of the Tokyo Imperial University, which is now Tokyo University. While translating English literary works, he embarked on his own literary career. In 1914, in the third year of the Taisho era, he published his debut novel The Nose in the magazine New Currents. Just a year later, he published Rashomon in the magazine Imperial Literature. This work not only helped him become a disciple of the literary giant Natsume Soseki, but also became one of his enduring representative works for the next century. Worth mentioning is that, including both Rashomon and In a Grove, 1/5 of Akutagawa's works were inspired by a classical Japanese novel called the Kanjaku Monogatari, which had captivated him. This work served as a significant source of inspiration. Now, let's delve into the story of Rashomon in the novel. The story takes place during the late Heian period in Japan, referring to the era from 794 AD when the Japanese capital was moved from Nara to Heiankyo, present-day Kyoto, until the establishment of the Kamakura shogunate in 1192. Heiankyo is modern-day Kyoto. Rashomon is a place name, referring to the main gate on Suzaku Avenue in Heiankyo. This gate was originally called Rajamon, but due to a character error, it became Rashomon. In the era the story is set, continuous natural disasters such as earthquakes, hurricanes, and famines left the entire imperial city in ruins. Even the Rajamon Gate, which symbolized the authority of the Heian dynasty's regime, was neglected and lost its imperial majesty. Foxes took residence there, thieves moved in, and even unclaimed corpses were brought inside. One evening, a few days after being dismissed by his employer, a ragged and hungry servant wandered to seek shelter beneath the city gate. There was no one nearby, only countless crows flying around the gate, pecking at the flesh of the deceased. The servant was troubled by thoughts of his impending fate. He knew that if he continued to roam aimlessly, he would likely starve to death on the roadside, left like a dog at the city gate. However, in such a decadent society, he couldn't find any means of sustenance unless he turned to becoming a thief. Yet his moral conscience prevented him from engaging in such reprehensible acts. Just as he was torn between these conflicting thoughts, he noticed movement atop the city gate. Curious, he stealthily climbed the wide, red-painted wooden ladder, much like a gecko, ascending to the top of the gate. The gate's rooftop was littered with corpses. Amidst the dim and flickering candlelight he discerned a frail and short, monkey-like old woman crouching among the heaps of bodies, gazing at the face of a young woman who had already passed away. Driven by 6 parts fear and 4 parts curiosity, the servant momentarily forgot to breathe, staring fixedly at every move of the old woman. He observed as the old woman gripped the neck of the deceased woman and began to pluck her hair. With each strand of hair pulled out, the servant's initial fear gradually diminished, replaced by an increasing disgust at the old woman's desecration of the body. Ultimately unable to contain himself, he sprang to his feet, grasping the sheath of the large knife hanging at his waist, and strode forcefully toward the old woman. Startled by the sudden appearance of the man, the old woman was rendered speechless with fear, her instinct urging her to flee. After a brief struggle, the servant, who held the upper hand in strength, seized the bony wrist of the old woman's hand, resembling a chicken's claw, and brought her to the ground. The trembling old woman lay prostrate on the ground, her eyes wide as if her eyeballs were about to pop out. Under the servant's scolding, she stammered to explain, much like a bird's cry, that her actions were a last resort. She merely intended to fashion the hair into a wig to exchange for a bit of money to survive. She acknowledged that she had committed an unforgivable sin, but her circumstances had forced her into it. Furthermore, she pointed out that none of the bodies lying there were entirely innocent, including the woman whose hair she plucked. That woman had, for a considerable period of time, sliced snakes into 4-inch pieces and passed them off as fish meat to sell to the military camps. Had she not succumbed to plague, that woman would likely still be engaging in such deceptive activities. Continuing, the old woman insisted that she did not see the woman's actions as immoral, as they were both driven by the necessity of survival. Now, the old woman herself, motivated by the same reasons, had plucked the hair from this woman's head, and surely, she believed, she too would be understood and forgiven. The servant listened calmly to the old woman's explanation, and a sudden courage welled up within him. However, this courage wasn't the same as his earlier righteous resolve to stop the old woman from desecrating the body. It was the kind of audacity he lacked when he was hesitating beneath the city gate. The choice between starving or becoming a thief now seemed clear in his mind. He had been led by the hardships of the world, and the logic of people eating people is not shameful to enter a darker realm. In a mocking tone, he confirmed with the old woman, "Is that so?" Then he added, "Well, if I strip your clothes off, don't hate me, or I'll starve too." With that, he swiftly removed the old woman's clothing, clutched it under his arm, and ran out of the city gate, disappearing into the night. This is the synopsis of the story Rashomon. Despite its brevity, this work profoundly exposes a brutal society where people eat people and mutual deceit and exploitation are the norm due to the struggle for survival among the common people. Ryunosuke Akutagawa's exceptional writing skill and profound thematic exploration have rendered this work a masterpiece that has stood the test of time. However, at this point, you might be reminded of the renowned Japanese director Akira Kurosawa's film, also titled Rashomon. If you've seen the movie and listened to the previous description, you might wonder if there is any connection between the novel and the film, as their plots seem fundamentally different. Let's first understand the film Rashomon. Released in 1950, it won 2 of the most influential international film awards the following year, the Golden Lion at the Venice Film Festival and the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film. Rashomon marked an important milestone in Japanese cinema's integration into mainstream Western culture. In the movie Rashomon, a murder case unfolds, and various individuals involved present their versions of events in a court proceeding. These testimonies contradict one another, creating a complex and perplexing narrative. The film became hugely popular, and subsequently, the term Rashomon came to refer to situations where multiple conflicting accounts obscure the truth. This term is widely used in daily life, news reporting, and has become a well-known symbol, even making its way into the specialized jargon of psychology and law. Notably, the film Rashomon not only bears the title Rashomon, but also prominently displays based on a story by Ryunosuke Akutagawa at the beginning. This adds to the confusion for audiences and readers alike, leading to the misconception that Ryunosuke Akutagawa wrote 2 different versions of Rashomon. However, the answer is negative. Ryunosuke Akutagawa only wrote one Rashomon, the one we introduced at the outset. The main plot of the film Rashomon is indeed drawn from Akutagawa's works, but it's not the same titled short story Rashomon. If you carefully observe the film's opening credits, you'll notice a line of small text in the lower left corner under Ryunosuke Akutagawa's name, which explicitly states that the film is adapted from another of Akutagawa's works, In a Grove. This work was written 7 years after Rashomon. As the basis for the film Rashomon, the work in a grove consists of 7 individual testimonies. The first testimony comes from a woodcutter in the courtroom. His opening statement is, "Yes, I found the dead body." He explains that on that day, just like any other, he had entered the forest to cut wood. Unexpectedly, in a quiet grove, he discovered the body of a samurai. The samurai had a gash on his chest, the blood had dried, staining the surrounding leaves red. The sword was missing, and nearby, there was only a rope and a wooden comb. The grass and fallen leaves were scattered, indicating a fierce struggle before the samurai was killed. The second testimony is also given in the courtroom, this time by a traveling monk. The monk recalls encountering a man and a woman on horseback heading towards the Gando Pass that same day. The woman wore a crimson robe, a conical hat, and a veil, making it impossible to see her face clearly. She rode a short-maned horse with reddish-brown fur. The man carried a sword and a bow with arrows, over 20 of them in a black lacquered quiver. The monk remembers this detail vividly and laments that he could never have foreseen the tragic fate awaiting the pair. He exclaims that life is indeed as fleeting as dew and lightning. Oh, how painful! The third person to testify in court is a constable from the local office. He apprehended the notorious bandit Tajimaru the previous night, during the early hours of darkness. Tajimaru was captured on a stone bridge after falling from his horse and sustaining injuries. The red-brown short-maned horse found at the scene, along with the bow and arrows carried by Tajimaru, exactly matched the description provided by the traveling monk. The constable reveals that the horse threw Tajimaru off, which he deems as retribution. Tajimaru had committed numerous wicked deeds, and even among thieves, he was infamous for his lustful behavior. He had caused the death of a woman who had come to pray at a temple and a young girl. If the man was indeed killed by Tajimaru, the constable worries about the woman who was with him and believes it's imperative to uncover the truth. The fourth witness summoned to testify is an elderly woman, the mother of the woman on horseback. Through her testimony, it is revealed that the victim was named Takehiko Kanazawa, 26 years old, a samurai from the province of Wakasa. He was mild-mannered and had no known enemies. The woman was his wife, Masago, 19 years old, characterized as strong-willed and determined. The elderly woman shares that the couple had been traveling to Wakasa together the previous day, never imagining that such a tragedy would occur. Tearfully, she curses the vile bandit Tajimaru and implores the court to quickly ascertain her daughter's whereabouts, her sole wish in life. At this point, the story reaches its first half's conclusion, providing readers with an overview of the case from the testimonies of these 4 individuals. The narrative will proceed to the more crucial second half, introducing the 3 main participants in the case, as they each recount the events leading up to the incident. The first to appear is the bandit Tajimaru. Tajimaru admits that he was captivated by the beauty of the samurai's wife and had wicked thoughts of making her his own. He deceived the samurai, leading him into the depths of the forest, and once he subdued him, he used the rope he typically used for climbing walls to bind the samurai to a cedar tree. He stuffed bamboo leaves into the samurai's mouth. Afterwards, he returned to where the woman was waiting outside the forest, falsely claiming that the samurai had fallen seriously ill. Without a second thought, the woman hurriedly followed him into the woods. As soon as she saw the bound samurai, she realized she had been deceived. She swiftly drew a short sword from her kimono and brandished it, attempting to kill Tajimaru. Tajimaru remarked that he had never encountered such a fierce woman before, but as a seasoned bandit, he quickly disarmed her. The woman was left with no choice but to surrender. Thus, before her husband's eyes, the bandit took possession of her. After the bandit had his way, he was about to depart when the samurai's wife suddenly grasped his arm and refused to let go. She explained how difficult it was for her to have been defiled by 2 men, and declared that she would rather die than continue living in such shame. She proposed a one-on-one duel between the bandit and her husband, with the victor claiming her. Tajimaru recounted that at that moment, the woman's eyes gleamed with a fiery intensity, and this ignited his determination to kill the samurai honorably. He untied the samurai, and the two engaged in a fierce struggle for 20 rounds, with Tajimaro ultimately fatally stabbing the samurai. Holding the blood-stained sword, he turned back to find the woman, only to discover she had vanished in the meantime. Realizing that he might be in grave danger next, Tajimaro quickly seized the samurai's weapons, mounted his horse, and rode to the capital. The subsequent testimony comes from the remorseful samurai's wife, who had sought refuge at Kayamiza Temple. She revealed that after the bandit had defiled her, he had sneered at her husband with a mocking smile. The samurai was securely bound to the tree and unable to move. The woman rushed to her husband's side, only to be kicked away by the bandit. As she struggled and looked up at her husband, the expression in his eyes wasn't one of anger or sadness, but one of disdain. The weight of that look struck her even more profoundly than the bandit's kick. Overwhelmed with grief, she lost consciousness. Upon awakening, she found the bandit had long since fled, leaving only her husband tied to the tree, his expression unchanged. The woman described feeling both ashamed and angry. Shaken, she stood up and stumbled to her husband's side. Resolved to end her life, she considered suicide but was compelled by the fact that her husband had witnessed her degradation. Determined to die alongside her husband, she plunged the short sword into his chest, losing consciousness once again. When she awoke, she found her husband had died. She wept while untying the rope from her husband's body and discarding it. She attempted various methods to end her own life, such as trying to slit her throat with a knife or jumping into a pond, but ultimately failed. At present, she not only endured violation at the hands of the bandit, but also killed her own husband, unsure of what to do next. Lastly, the spirit of the samurai speaks through the mouth of the witch. The samurai recounts that after the bandit had taken possession of his wife, he even tried to persuade her to marry him and elope together. He exchanged glances with his wife, silently urging her not to fall for the bandit's sweet words. However, his wife paid no heed to him and, captivated, looked at the bandit and said she would go anywhere with him. As the bandit led her out of the forest, she suddenly turned her head, pointing at the samurai, who was still bound to the tree, and shouted, "Kill him! As long as he's alive, I can never be with you." The bandit kicked the woman to the ground and asked the samurai how to deal with her. The samurai said that upon hearing the woman's words, he instantly forgave the bandit for his earlier crimes. During this exchange, the wife managed to escape, and the bandit pursued her, cutting the ropes binding the samurai before departing. Ultimately, the samurai was left alone in the forest, betrayed and consumed by despair. He picked up the short sword and thrust it into his own chest. In the ensuing silence, he sensed someone approaching, who quietly removed the short sword from his chest, causing blood to gush forth. As night descended, the samurai slowly succumbed to eternal darkness. At this point, the story of In a Grove comes to an abrupt halt, leaving readers in a state of confusion. There is no resolution, no conclusion. Readers and critics alike initially approach the work with the intention of unraveling the mystery, only to find themselves trapped in an unsolvable puzzle. As a result, Japanese critic Nakamura Mitsuo questioned the rigor of the work, suggesting that the incomplete clues and unverifiable facts left readers with an impression of life that cannot be fully understood through words. On the other hand, another critic, Fukuda Tsunezumi, argued that not all literary works need to adhere to the notion of understanding life through words. The theme that In a Grove seeks to convey is precisely the unreliability of facts or truth. As the plot unfolds, the testimonies of the three individuals, Bandit Tajimaru, the samurai, and the samurai's wife, become increasingly dubious. Readers gradually sense that their accounts are reflections of their inner realities rather than objective truths. The novel slowly advances through its enigmatic plot, ultimately reinforcing its theme, the unreliability of narration. It was precisely due to an appreciation for this unique narrative structure and the underlying theme of unresolvable truth that director Akira Kurosawa adapted the work into a film. But why did he choose to name the film Rashomon? Mainly because Kurosawa aimed to enhance the film's depth by creating a dual narrative space effect. This was done to mitigate the novel's experimental coldness and to make it more accessible to a general audience. In the film, Kurosawa incorporated the woodcutter as a narrator and situated the narration at the Rashomon Gate, effectively reimagining and enriching the original narrative. Let's delve into the beginning and ending of the film. The film opens with a scene. On a day of heavy rain, a destitute beggar seeks shelter from the rain by entering the dilapidated Rashomon Gate of the capital city. Inside the gate, two other individuals are also taking shelter from the rain, a woodcutter and a priest. The woodcutter wears a puzzled expression and repeatedly mutters, "I don't understand, I really don't." Although the priest remains silent, his contemplative demeanor suggests he's pondering the woodcutter's murmurs. The peculiar behavior of the two intrigues the beggar, who, after persistent questioning, prompts the woodcutter to recount a thought-provoking incident that occurred just 3 days earlier in the area. The film's conclusion unfolds as follows. After the woodcutter finishes recounting the incident, the sound of a crying baby is suddenly heard within the gate. The beggar rushes over to pick up the baby, then proceeds to strip the baby of its clothing with the intention of selling it. The woodcutter steps forward to intervene, criticizing the beggar's selfishness. However, the beggar retorts, accusing the woodcutter of stealing a jeweled dagger from the crime scene, which is why he refrained from revealing the complete truth he witnessed at the scene of the body's discovery. Unable to counter the beggar's accusation, the woodcutter helplessly watches as the beggar departs with the baby's clothes. Astute viewers may have already noticed that the scene of the clothing theft at the end of the film mirrors the plot of the novel Rashomon. At this juncture, these seemingly unrelated works converge. This convergence is possible because, while the two works have entirely different story backgrounds, characters, and presentation techniques, they share a common theme: egoism or self-interest. In the novel Rashomon, the deceased engaged in dishonest business to earn money, the old woman sold the dead man's hair for profit, and the servants stripped the old woman's clothes to make a living, all morally questionable acts driven by self-interest. Similarly, in the novel In a Grove, the specific manner of the samurai's death is inconsequential. What matters is that all three parties concealed portions of the truth and fabricated testimonies that favored their own interests. The bandit claims to have killed the samurai in a fair duel. The samurai's wife claims that she, unable to bear her husband's contempt due to his suspicions, accidentally killed him. The samurai himself asserts that he chose suicide due to the pain of his wife's betrayal. These self-centered actions can all be viewed as manifestations of egoism. In the concluding scenes of the film Rashomon, the director adds a sequence. After the self-centered beggar departs with the baby's clothes, the woodcutter, who had previously taken the stolen dagger, confides to the priest that he intends to adopt the baby, making it his 7th child. The priest, initially despondent after witnessing the depths of human depravity, shows a glimmer of hope upon hearing this. As the torrential rain finally subsides, the woodcutter, holding the baby, begins his journey back home under the setting sun. Some viewers may find the ending's emphasis on positivity somewhat contrived, bordering on cliched. However, if we consider the brief life of Ryunosuke Akutagawa, the author of the original short story, we may better appreciate the director's well-intentioned approach. Perhaps influenced by his mother's mental illness, Ryunosuke Akutagawa was a profoundly melancholic and sensitive writer. Though only 29, I have no trace of cheerfulness. This is how Akutagawa described himself during his later years, reminiscing about his early days as a writer. "Life is no more than a line of poetry by Baudelaire," he exclaimed from the second floor of a bookstore when he was 20. At the age of 35, burdened by an uncertain anxiety about the future, Ryunosuke Akutagawa took his own life. Ryunosuke Akutagawa had a deep affection for the Kanjaku Monogatari, a collection of over 1,000 folktales from India, China, and Japan during the late Heian period, featuring various supernatural beings. As previously mentioned, including Rashomon and In a Grove, 1/5 of Akutagawa's works were inspired by this collection. Even his breakthrough short story, The Nose, was no exception. This work also garnered high praise from his teacher, Natsume Soseki. Akutagawa claimed to have finally uncovered the true nature of the Kanjaku Monogatari, describing it as brimming with the beauty of the wild, a human comedy of the Japanese imperial era. Whenever he opened the book, he felt as though he could hear the laughter and tears of the common people of that era. In the inaugural issue of Shinshicho magazine, he wrote, "I will continue to use works of this nature for my creations, and I am reluctant to label them solely as historical novels." His obsession with the Kanjaku Monogatari led Akutagawa to rewrite ancient legends with his own pen, offering modern rationalizations. Similarly, director Akira Kurosawa used a camera to reinterpret Akutagawa's stories. As mentioned earlier, at the end of the film, Kurosawa intentionally arranged for the woodcutter to voluntarily take the baby home to raise. Under the setting sun, amidst the suffering of the human world, the priest seemed to glimpse hope once again. This expression was not merely an attempt to add a glimmer of light to the somber film, or convey courage to the audience. It was more like a warm nod to Ryunosuke Akutagawa, who had prematurely given up on life. It was as if he was saying, "For the future, we might carry an uncertain anxiety, but at the same time, there is always hope." With that, let's recap the key points from this segment. First, Ryunosuke Akutagawa was a widely known Japanese writer who was active in the early 20th century. Despite primarily focusing on short stories and ending his creative career through suicide at the age of 35, he still managed to establish himself as one of Japan's premier writers. Second, his masterpiece Rashomon was published in 1915. Set in the late Heian period and centered around the Rashomon Gate in the capital city of Heiankyo, modern-day Kyoto, this work profoundly exposes a brutal society characterized by man-eat-man. Third, Japanese director Akira Kurosawa directed a landmark film in Japanese cinema history titled Rashomon. This film is an adaptation of Ryunosuke Akutagawa's work, but not the eponymous Rashomon story. Rather, it is based on another work titled In a Grove. Fourth, In a Grove is a highly experimental work in terms of narrative structure. Reading it as a detective story would inevitably lead to a dead end. The author's intention behind the work is to convey the idea that the truth of life is inherently elusive. Fifth, Ryunosuke Akutagawa's fascination with the Japanese classic Kanjaku Monogatari shu is evident in both Rashomon and In a Grove, which draw inspiration from it. Akira Kurosawa's film adaptation further reinterprets Akutagawa's narratives, allowing the audience to see a modern interpretation that infuses hope into the tales of darkness. Well, that concludes the content for this episode. If you enjoyed my video, please click like, subscribe to my channel, and share it with your friends. Thank you.